So thank you all for joining us today for this workshop on understanding implicit bias. We've got with us Dr. Akhu today. She's a licensed clinical psychologist, acclaimed author and renowned workshop facilitator, and a former president of the New York Association of Black Psychologists. Dr. Akhu specializes in stress management through self-care, and she also does work in the areas of parenting, implicit bias, and restorative practices. Dr. Akhu has been in private practice for 20 years and is currently an adjunct professor at CUNY and NYU. She's a trainer for the NYPD hostage negotiator team and the author of 8 self-help books, the latest of which is Cultivating Inner Peace, a Sustainable System for the Professional Black Woman, or for professional Black women. And most importantly, she has found the time in her busy life to come to us and help us understand implicit bias a little bit more. So thank you everyone for taking some time out of your day to join us. I'm gonna pass it over to Dr. Akhu and spotlight her video.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to help me with one more thing, Krishna, because I think you're better at this than I am. Helping
Absolutely.
people find things like thumbs up and thumbs down, where all those reactions are, and make sure that people can find them. Can you walk them through the steps of finding thumbs up, thumbs down, and hands up? So, because we're going to need those as we go on.
Absolutely. So I'm pretty sure the thumbs up and thumbs down and raising your hand options are available at the bottom of your screen. If you are on a computer, you can mouse around down there to access those buttons. Another way to access them is to go into the Participants tab, and you should see those options near your name. If you have any questions about that, then you can go into chat and send me a message during the workshop. I'm happy to help you with the more technical questions with Zoom. And if you're on a tablet or a phone, you may need to tap around on the screen to access those options.
Okay, thank you so much. Because I can't keep straight how it is different on the phone and the computer and the tablet. So I thought, since you seem to have those technology things right in the tip of your tongue, that you'd be able to help me with that. So thank you, Krishna. All right, so let's go through a few housekeeping things to get us all started and ready for today. I'm going to ask you to get rid of any distractions if you can. I know some people are at work, and if you're at work and you can't, that's understandable. But if you are not at work and you can get rid of any distractions, anything that's going to pop up on your phone or Bing or anything like that, I'd appreciate it. As I already said, we're going to keep you on mute so that there's not a lot of noise in the background, but there are going to be a few times when I'm going to have us unmute everybody. And it might be noisy for a minute, but it will be worth it for us all to hear each other. When you're prompted, if there are a few points where I'm going to ask for feedback or for someone to answer and engage, please raise your hand, and I'm going to ask Krishna to help me unmute people and get them in. Write down any questions you have and keep them to the end. Please try to keep the chat available for our conversation and the things that I'm going to prompt you on, because otherwise, as I'm managing the chat, it can get confusing. So if you want to say something to somebody specifically, you can send them a private chat, I believe, and you can definitely private chat with me. Some of the things we're going to be talking about today will be pretty challenging. And so because of that challenge, I ask you, if you feel uncomfortable with your responses, feel free to private chat to me, and I will read out your response, but not your name, so that we can share the information with everybody, but not have it connected to your name if it's uncomfortable. And did I already say, please write down your questions for the end so that we can cover all your questions at one time, as we try to get through a lot of material in only an hour and a half. All right. So engagement, it is so important that you be fully present and engaged in this activity so that you can get the full experience of all the activities we're going to do. And we're going to do a number of different activities to show you what implicit bias is all about. So I ask you to be fully engaged, to be honest with yourself. You know, as I said, some of this stuff might make you uncomfortable. Expect to be uncomfortable. That is part of the process about learning these difficult things. So please know that you are in a safe environment, right? Assume everyone here has good intentions, and we're all here to learn and explore. So we want to make sure that everyone feels safe. Although this is being recorded, you know, you do not have to put anything in the recording that you don't want there, so you can privately chat to me. The chat will not be included in the recording. If I call out your responses, it won't include your name. So this is one of the ways of being fully here and having full engagement without worrying, because again, some of this stuff is going to be a little uncomfortable. Our goal for today is to provide you with a basic understanding of what implicit bias is. By the end of our time together, a little hour and a half, you'll understand the difference between implicit bias and racism. You'll understand how implicit biases form. You will understand how implicit bias helps and harms. And you will understand how to weaken such biases and move past them. Okay, I just need to arrange things a little bit here so that I don't have things. I want to make sure before I forget that okay, I'm already sharing my computer video. Okay, so here we go. Let's get started. And I want to start with a personal story, so you have some idea of one reason why this is so important to me, although there are many. So imagine one really early morning, right? Friends of mine and I are standing on a tennis court, right? We're the only people there. We are playing tennis early in the morning before anybody else gets there. After about an hour or so, a young Black male with a hoodie pulls over his head, and wearing really baggy sweatpants comes to the tennis courts and starts walking the perimeter just outside of the fence where we're all playing. Although I don't live in the development where I was playing tennis, I know there aren't many people of color who live there. There was an immediate tension and distraction among the tennis players. And though no one said anything out loud, all turned their attention toward the hooded interloper. What's he doing here? He doesn't belong here. Is he here to hurt us, steal from us, break into our cars? I can only imagine what was going through everyone's head, because sadly, these questions were going through mine. You see, I'm a Black woman, as you've already noticed, I'm sure. The other 3 players on the court were white females. While I was able to quickly de-escalate my alarm because of my personal experiences and because of who I am, I started thinking, he's not doing anything but walking around. He may be new to the area and is just out exploring. I don't think my tennis friends were able to get there quite as quickly as I was. Then I realized something. I wouldn't have been so uncomfortable at all if it wasn't for the fact that I was with my white friends. Right? I was channeling their alarm in the situations. So I started talking to them and getting everyone to focus on the tennis match. And soon everyone seemed to calm down. The Black male was soon joined by 3 Black young ladies. And after checking out the courts, they went to the playground area and sat around on the swings and were talking. I wonder what might have happened had I not been there to be a voice of reason. Would an all-white group have been alarmed enough to call the police? It is experiences like this that draw me to doing this kind of work. And my first question for you today is, why are you here? What do you want to learn? Is anybody willing to, raise their hand, come off mute, and tell us why you're here? Krishna, if you see any hands, you can raise your hand. If your video is up, you can just raise your hand. You don't have to look for it, the raised hand feature. And if not, raise your hand or type into the chat. And I forgot to open the chat so I can read the chat. So we have, at this moment, 69 people, and I know about 99 people registered. Why are you all here?
So I could start, and if you don't mind, to seed the discussion maybe. I know personally, I seek out workshops like this to kind of reflect, to ask myself some of the questions about maybe what I'm not actively thinking about when I go about my work, especially in outreach sense, as I'm working with diverse groups and populations. I think it's easy to fall into mindsets and just unconscious patterns that will remain unconscious unless I am asking myself these questions and listening and hearing what other people are thinking and experiencing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now we have some really great responses in the chat. I'm from Chappaqua and a lot's going on there. I know to know what implicit bias is. I'm here to learn and be more sensitive and not to make assumptions. Wonderful. I want to be more sensitive and aware to see where my own biases are. Great. To understand what I say and do, sorry, it just moved, do and do can reflect implicit bias. To understand my own biases toward others. I want to better understand implicit bias and see what biases I may hold internally. Great. To help me be the best version of myself, I really like that one. I want to learn to be a better ally and how we can change, how we can move beyond our own implicit biases and work better as an organization in our libraries and communities. Wonderful. Thank you all. Okay. Now, I hope to be able to fulfill all of those things and more today. So let's just start with what implicit bias is. It's a term that describes what's happening when, despite our best intentions and without our awareness, stereotypes and assumptions enter our minds and affect our actions. It's our beliefs or attitudes that are activated automatically without being aware of them. What does that look like and feel like? And why does it even matter? Let's try to bring implicit bias to life by doing some quick exercises. The purpose is not whether or not you can complete them, but what they show us about how our brains work. Let's start by playing a game, a word game, a word association game. It may be a bit of noise, but I'm going to ask everyone to unmute so that you can say aloud the word that goes with the blank, okay? So for example, can you unmute everybody, Krishna? If I were to say up, for most of us, the first word that comes to mind is down.
That's why.
Here we go. Here's the next one. I want everybody to say out loud the first word.
I'm just sending it to you.
I'm sorry, what
You have
happened?
a
Old.
Old.
Old. Exactly. We're saying the first word that comes to mind. Old.
I ordered a copy, but we haven't received it. I don't know why.
Hey. Okay.
Okay.
Four. Black.
White.
Wait. Krishna, you can mute everybody again. Thank you. I heard almost unanimously, and maybe unanimously because it was noisy, so the same responses came through louder and clearer than some other responses that might have been there. And those may not have been the first words for everybody. But obviously there was nothing difficult about that exercise, right? It's easy to fill in the blanks. It's not only was it easy to fill in the blanks, but you likely had a response ready long before you were even prompted to fill it in. This is the power of our implicit cognition and our lightning fast associations. When faced with incomplete information, we rarely rely on associative memory to quickly fill in the gaps. It's also important to know that most people have the same response. Most people responded old to young, right? Day to night, and white to black. So we almost all had the same responses. Again, there might have been people that had other responses, but because of the noise, we may not have heard those. But I definitely heard the responses that I expected come through loud and clear, even with the background noise. All right, so for the next activity, you're gonna type into the chat what you see, okay? So I'm gonna show you a picture, and I want you to type in the chat what you see in this picture. Ready? Here we go. Okay, so yes, and with 70 people on the line, it goes by fast sometimes, the chat. But I see saxophone player, a man playing a horn, a man playing a sax, a man playing a sax, saxophone player, saxophone player, saxophone player. Okay. Man playing horn, all right. Very good. So it looks like just about everybody sees a saxophone player. Can I get thumbs up? Does everybody see the saxophone player? I'm trying to now put it so I can see all your little faces and thumbs. Okay. How many people see the woman's face? Come back up if you see the woman's face. Okay. How many people can't see the woman's face? Give me a thumbs down if you don't see the woman's face. Okay, so everybody Only after I mentioned it. Yeah, somebody types in. Right. Only after I mentioned it. Some people, almost everybody saw the man at first, but after I mentioned it, people were able to go back. Some people were able to go back and see the woman's face. All right, there's no thumbs down on mine after I said it. All right, just in case there's anybody that doesn't see it, or, you know, for the video's sake, if anybody that's watching this later on doesn't see it, I'm going to show you both. But as you can see from this one, wait, sorry, I have to move things around. All right, so most people saw one or the other first, but then when I mentioned it, was able to see both. Right? With a few more details, the woman's face is very clear here. With a few more details, the man playing the horn is very clear here. Right? But as we can see, most of us either go with one or the other, just because our brains automatically fill things in. Let's do one more of these activities that's really fun. For the next one, I want you to read out loud. We're going to keep you all on mute, but I'm going to look at your faces so I can see when you are finished with your reading the paragraph. You're going to read the paragraph that you're going to see next out loud to yourself. Okay, everybody ready? Here we go.
If you can read this paragraph, it's because our minds are very good at putting together pieces of information in a way that it's easy.
Okay, this was a horribly misspelled paragraph, yet you were able to read it without much difficulty at all. Even if it took you a little longer to read, your unconscious cognition automatically made sense of the paragraph based on your ability to associate it with words you already know. These three exercises show us the automatic adaptive nature of our implicit processing. When faced with otherwise ambiguous or confusing content, our brains try to quickly make sense of it by relying on associations we've stored in our memories. Importantly, these stored associations don't have to be based on accurate and logical information. By just seeing concepts grouped together repeatedly, we can internalize associations that are skewed, distorted, and inaccurate. Okay. This video explains a little bit more about how implicit bias works.
Your brain, by some accounts, receives roughly 11 million pieces of information each second, but your conscious brain is only able to process about 40. How do you handle all the rest? You handle it because you're really using two brains. Your conscious brain, which works with facts and data, has very little capacity and processes information slowly, and your unconscious brain, which is habit and intuition driven, has huge capacity and is really fast. One of your unconscious brain's best tricks is its ability to recognize patterns and use them to assign people and things to categories, allowing your unconscious brain to deal with all of the known, not dangerous issues, and leave only the few unknown or dangerous issues to your conscious brain. This allows us to recognize a pattern and act on it, rather than having to think about every interaction as if we were experiencing it for the first time. We can glance at that four-legged animal and know if it's a wolf or a cocker spaniel. That recognition allows us to make assumptions about the animal facing us, that the wolf belongs to the wild animal category and is likely to be dangerous, or that the cocker spaniel is in the domestic dog category and not likely to be dangerous. The assumptions we make about these pattern groups are likely to be based on our own experiences, on information we have gained from our culture or background, or from the media we listen to, or people we admire. Unfortunately, those assumptions are often wrong. When we categorize people, our brains apply two other tools. One is affinity bias, a hardwired preference to respond positively to people who look, sound, and act like ourselves. Brain imaging scans show that when people are shown images of faces that differ from their own, it activates in milliseconds activity in the part of the unconscious brain that alerts us to possible danger. This may reflect a survival tool left over from ancient times when danger often came from those outside our immediate group. Today, however, this means the associations and biases are likely to be unconsciously activated every time when we come across a member of a group, even if we consciously reject group stereotypes. In addition to affinity bias, our unconscious brain categorizes people into groups and then connects those groups to our learned ideas or constructs about what is good or bad. Now, we've decided whether someone is like us or not, and whether they're good or not, all within milliseconds of meeting them. So, what can you do to manage your unconscious biases? You've already started by just learning about unconscious bias. Now, identify your own biases and address one at a time by building inclusive habits. Remember, if you do not intentionally, deliberately, and proactively include, you will unintentionally exclude.
Okay. So unconscious bias versus conscious bias, right? Conscious brain, the unconscious brain versus the conscious brain. These biases are formed based on our programming. Our programming from the media, from culture, from friends, family, teachers. So let's look at that important aspect of programming. Okay. I want to show you how easy it is to be programmed. And can everybody see me, even though this is, mostly we're sharing screen, but you guys can see me also, right? I should be little in the corner of your screen somewhere. Good. I want to show you how easy it is to be programmed. All of us are biased. Every single one of us have implicit bias because we all have been programmed. I'm going to, in a second, take you all off of mute again, and we're going to say something out loud together, okay? We're going to use this word. What's this word?
Folk.
Exactly. All right. Please take everybody off mute. Again, it might be a little noisy. I wanted to make sure everybody knew what we were doing before we take you off mute. So what I'm just going to ask you to do is every time you see my hands go down, and we're going to just do this together so that the noise, we minimize it. But I'm just going to ask you to repeat the word that we already see here, which is
Folk.
exactly. So let's just repeat that all together. Every time you see my hands go down.
Folk.
Good.
Folk.
Good.
Folk.
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 Oh. Oh. Oh, one more time with feeling now. What do you call the white of an egg? What do you call the white of an egg?
Yolk.
What do you call the white of an egg?
Robert White.
White.
Oh.
But everybody on mute for a minute.
Yeah.
Did you guys hear your answer when I asked you, what did you call the white of an egg? You said yolk. And if you call that the what do you call the yellow part then?
The yolk.
Aha. But that's what you answered when I asked you, what do you call the white of the egg, right?
I doubled
Why is
down
that?
too.
Because of programming. All right. That was easy, right? Programming. Let's try one more and see, now that you even know what's coming, what happens. All right, same thing. I'm going to put my hands out and you guys are going to say this word. Can you take everybody off mute, please, Krishna? All right, you ready? Shop.
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 Stop.
Shop.
Stop.
Shop.
Stop.
Shop.
Stop. Stop with feeling. Stop.
Stop.
What do you do with a green light?
Stop.
Go.
Oh, oops.
Oh no!
Go at a
Sorry,
green
on mute
light.
again, Krishna. Thank you. All right. And you know what was so interesting about that is you all paused because you all knew it was coming, but yet and still you all said stop. And, I'm glad, the one good thing about right now is that we're not driving a lot. So I don't have to drive in any of the towns where you guys are not stopping at red and you're stopping at green lights, right? Okay. Look at how easy programming can be, even when you are aware that you're being programmed, right? And again, not everybody, maybe somebody, I didn't say stop. Okay, thank you. Of course, some people are not as easily programmed as others, but overall, in this big audience, I definitely heard people say stop. Right? Clearly, our fast-thinking unconscious brain can play a strong role in our functioning. Let's start by looking at how this might affect the way we interact with people. Okay. All right. So, for example, the instant we see someone, we might assign them to salient and easily accessible social categories such as age, gender, race, or profession. Once we tag someone as belonging to a particular group, our brains automatically activate a cloud of information that we've come to associate with that group. These associations then come to influence how we come to think about and interact with that person. Think about stereotypes and how a trait is associated with a category or group of people. For example, some groups are considered athletic, whereas others are assumed to be good at math. Some groups are seen as natural leaders, whereas others are seen as natural caregivers. Take a look at this image, for example. Your brain will hashtag as Asian, and the attitudes and associations that you have associated with that category are automatically activated. If you have a positive attitude toward Asians, you might smile at them just a little bit more if they approach you asking for directions. If you think Asians are good at math, you might be a little more inclined to hire that person as an accountant, but not as your lawyer. If you think Asians aren't athletic, you probably won't choose him for your pickup game of basketball. These attitudes and stereotypes are biased because they represent information that diverges from some neutral point. Where do those biases come from? Why do we have stereotypes for some groups and not others? That's through exposure in particular contexts. Sometimes that exposure is through direct contact. Sometimes it's through vicarious contact, mediated through books, television, movies, social media, and popular groups. Okay, so pause for a moment and think about your attitudes toward Native Americans. Also, what traits you associate with them. Type into the chat. What traits come to mind when you think about Native Americans? And again, you can type this privately to me, and the chat will not be saved for the video. So type into the chat, what things come to mind? What do you associate with Native Americans? Okay. Earth lovers, care for the earth, persecuted, okay. Cowboys and Indians, oops, that's going so fast. Disadvantaged, okay. Oppressed group. Taking care of the earth, which is a trait. Casinos, pilgrims, horses, spiritual and stoic. Spiritual, okay. Respect for all living things of the earth, respect for elders and multi-generational. Wise. All right, somebody's skipping ahead. All right, how did you learn about those traits? Type that into the chat. How did you learn about those traits? School, books, movies, library, books. Oh yeah, I guess it's the library, right? Books, TV, travel, reading, movies, and TV. All right. So for some of you, it was through direct interaction, but for many of us, from what I'm reading in the chat, it was more indirect, from media and books. How accurate a representation do you think those exposures gave you? Right? Let me get some thumbs up and thumbs down. Do you think that the exposure you got from school, from books, was accurate or inaccurate? Okay, I see somebody kind of went like this, which is not, you can only do that if I can see your video. You can't do this with the thumbs up and thumbs down. Okay, a little of both, partly inaccurate. Accuracy varies, right? So accuracy varies is a good answer, except for this is where we get to pair in our minds. This is how we form these implicit biases based on the exposure that we have. Okay. So it is the exposure that we experience that makes these unconscious associations that cause us to have isms that we're not even aware of. Because we are aware of an implicit bias, we are often mindful about it and check our because we are aware of explicit bias, we often are mindful about it and we check our explicit bias for accuracy, appropriateness, and fairness. Most of us actually try to revise stereotypes as we are aware of them, and we try to gather new, better information, right? So those of us who may have learned about Native Americans in school may be trying to get more accurate information as we have opportunities so that we can revise those stereotypes. But this sort of self-correction doesn't go on with implicit bias because we don't even know we have them. Unfortunately, there's increased evidence that implicit bias, even though they operate invisibly, influence our actions and decisions in small but consequential ways. Now let's go through one final exercise that really speaks to the question of why implicit bias matters. On the next screen, you're going to see a row of words. When prompted, please say out loud. We're going to keep you all on mute so we won't have the noise, but I want you to speak out loud for yourselves. Please say out loud the color of each word from left to right, not what the word says, okay? So you're going to say the color, but you're not reading the letters of the word. You're not going to read the word. Everybody got that? You ready?
Yes.
Thumbs up? Yes? Okay, here we go. Read out loud. I am watching your mouths, so we're reading out loud so I can tell when you're done.
Green, red, orange, blue, purple.
Red, purple, blue, green.
Red, purple, blue, green, orange, green, red, orange, blue, purple, blue, green, purple, orange, red, orange, blue, red, purple, green, blue, orange, green, red, blue.
All right. So very good. Great. Now let's try that again with a similar set of words. Remember, just say the color of the word. Don't read the word. You guys ready? Let's go.
Red, purple, white, green, blue, green, red.
You can keep yourselves on mute. Okay. All right. How many of you struggled to say the color and not the word this time? Let me see some thumbs up if you struggled, or hands up. Yeah, right? Okay. This assessment is known as the Stroop test, and it looks at the dynamics of automatic association. For most people, the first stream was simple. The color and the words themselves matched. Therefore, the results of your implicit inclination to read the word aligned with your explicit direction to say the color. On the other hand, your automatic inclination to read the word the second time may have taken a little bit longer, may have made it take a little bit longer. As you just experienced this, our implicit and explicit goals can and often do diverge. This is why implicit bias matters. While we like to think of ourselves as rational and logical adults, the reality is a lot of our thought processes are occurring unconsciously without our intention and control. Okay, let's look at the most prominent ism that might be affected because of implicit bias. It's certainly not the only one, but the most prominent one. Okay. Structural racism is about the dimensions of our history and culture that have allowed privileges associated with whiteness and disadvantages associated with color to endure and adapt over time. Structural racism is not something that a few people or institutions choose to practice. Instead, it is a feature of the social, economic, and political system in which we all exist. What do you think is the impact of implicit bias programming when unchecked? Put your answers into the chat. What do you think is the impact? Holding people back. Status quo stays the same. Inequity, right? Bottom line, inequity, yeah. We jump to unfair conclusions about people. Could I repeat the question? The question is, what do you think is the impact of implicit bias programming if it's unchecked? And I guess the bottom line, that the answer that was given so far that sums it up is inequity. Nothing will change. All right. Status quo, things never change. Institutionalized prejudice. Right. Okay. So here are some examples of what can happen. Okay. Studies have shown that white names get 50% more callbacks than Black names, regardless of industry or occupation. And that those are names that are easily identified, like Dr. Akhu is easily identified. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely than white women to die of pregnancy-related causes nationwide. In New York City, they're 12 times more likely to die. These examples show how pervasive implicit bias can affect all aspects of our lives. And especially in the criminal justice setting. To understand the gaping racial disparities, it helps to understand how implicit bias takes a hold in the criminal justice system. As explained by senior correspondent German Lopez of VOX. As you can see here, as he states, everyone carries implicit bias, but those biases can have an effect on who is getting arrested and therefore who ends up in prison or death. Okay. So I want to be clear that implicit bias is not the problem. We all have implicit biases. We are all programmed. That's not the problem. However, our implicit bias leads to our perception, and perception leads to our decision making, and that is what leads to outcomes. So it's important for us to not just make decisions based on perceptions, based on unconscious bias, but to bring in understanding, communication, and other things into our decision making process so that we can have equitable outcomes. This next short video provides a real good example of how we can work against our unconscious bias for more equitable outcomes.
Your best bet is to focus on changing procedures and practices that are closely aligned with the issue that you're worried about, so that the opportunity to act on your implicit bias never pops up.
The first step is to give yourself an audit.
I really encourage what I call counting, looking at the data, seeing if disparities are occurring. And you can only check this by keeping track of it over time.
Once we identify situations prone to producing bias, we can take steps to blind decision makers to the identity of those affected by their decisions. in situations like job interviews, where decision makers will learn about demographic information, Professor Lai recommends another strategy.
When we don't pre-commit ourselves to decision-making criteria, we're more likely to act in line with potentially our implicit biases. So what you might want to do is instead give yourself the exercise ahead of time to figure out what are the criteria that are actually important rather than kind of deciding after the fact.
These are things we can all do. We can count our decisions in our professional and private lives and take action to limit the influence of bias. One thing is clear. Merely wanting to change is not enough.
I wanted to say something else about that. As you have seen, implicit bias can shape our beliefs and our assumptions, color the way we treat other people, and even help decide what feels true for us when it comes to larger social and political issues. So what can you do about implicit bias? I have a call to action for you. I'm going to ask you to really think about all the stuff that you've learned so far and to think about what you can do. What are you going to do to keep your unconscious bias from leading to harmful decisions? I'm challenging you all. Now that you know the harm that implicit bias can lead to, I'm asking you to do something about your bias. But don't worry, I'm going to give you some guidance for the rest of our workshop so that you are not just trying to figure this out on your own. The first thing that you can do is to uncover your implicit biases, right? To make your unconscious bias conscious. And the Implicit Bias Project, the project Implicit is the way to do that easily, and it can really help you. I'm going to show you a little video about how Project Implicit works so that you can get some idea. And don't worry, at the end of all of this, you have a link for a handout, and on that handout is a direct link for Project Implicit so that you can spend some time when we're finished together actually going through and finding out more about your own implicit biases.
You're not biased, right? This free online test might tell you otherwise. The Implicit Association Test, or IAT, can reveal racial and gender biases you might not even know you have. Here's how it works. The test asks you to rapidly group a series of images and words. For instance, in one section of the race IAT, you press a certain key whenever you see a white face or a positive word. You press another key if it's a black face or a negative word. And you have to react as fast as you can. In another section, the associations are reversed. White faces go with negative words, while black faces are grouped with positive words. It turns out that 70% of test takers, white and non-white, respond more slowly when grouping black faces with positive words. The test calls this an automatic preference for white people. Other IAT tests on subjects like gender and disability have also found pervasive automatic associations that mirror social stereotypes. Your IAT results may well surprise you. Indeed, most test takers would answer on a questionnaire that white and black people are equal, and men and women should have equal pay. And many of them honestly think so. We're not talking about extremists here, but people like you and me. So what might the IAT reveal about us?
We may grow in our life to recognize that we don't endorse a particular stereotype about a group, but that doesn't mean that we lose that memory for what the culture has taught us the stereotype to be. This is a spoiler alert, but you may know that Santa Claus is not real, but that doesn't prevent you from having a full narrative about who that person is and looks like and what he does. And stereotypes are often the same way, by function of simply seeing someone from the group, one of the things we do unconsciously and automatically is pull out of memory all the information we have about the group.
And these memories shape what we perceive as reality without us realizing it. Implicit biases can be hidden in our everyday actions. When we open our inboxes and see a lot of emails, whose message do we end up replying to? Do we laugh when we hear a racist or sexist joke? When we vote, what makes us think one candidate is more competent? Research shows implicit biases can cause major inequalities on a collective scale.
This is a really eye-opening test that I would recommend you take for your own enlightenment. And that enlightenment might surprise you. It may not be the biases that you think you have, again, because our implicit biases and our consciously aware of stereotypes may not match. But it is helpful in uncovering those biases so that you have a place to start. I'll give you the link once again in the handout at the end of the workshop, so you don't have to worry about trying to go find that now, so that you can stay fully focused here with me, but you'll get a link at the end, and I encourage you to give it a try. There are lots of different subtests that you can take to look at different areas of bias. Okay. Another thing you can do in terms of reducing your implicit bias is to break your socialization patterns. If you usually, and most of us do, socialize with people that are similar to us. One of the aspects that we haven't looked at very much in implicit bias is, that was mentioned in the first video, is affinity bias, right? The fact that we tend to connect with people who look like us, that are in our group. So you can counteract this bias by increasing contact with people who are different from you. That interaction will have to be, you'll have to make effort to make sure that that interaction is equal. So just riding the subway with people who are different won't do it. You have to form genuine friendships with those people rather than rely on casual or infrequent contact. Expand your network. Consciously choose to form professional relationships and friendships with people from different cultures than your own. Okay. Notice positive examples. Research has shown that implicit bias responds to current input. New experiences can replace older data. Focus your attention on positive characteristics and actions of people who are outside of your in-group. Like you can make sure you watch movies and documentaries, but you want to make sure you watch them that are created by the people that they are speaking about, not by the general population, which is just going to reinforce the usual stereotypes. Seek out images that push against the implicit bias that biases that you have uncovered. When you uncover that implicit bias that most of us think about, really look for something different, right? Look for Black men doing good things. Look for people who are not, what you normally think of, because that is the way to do it. So I have some examples for you here. Being aware of people like male nurses, right? Because when most of us think of nurses, we think of women. Elderly athletes, female scientists. All of these connections can weaken the biases that are already in our brain. Okay, don't double down on being colorblind. Okay? We all have implicit bias, but we don't all have the power to address systemic racism. I hope this next short video will help you understand why you might want to retreat from dealing with this stuff, this hard stuff, and why it's so important that you bravely embrace your biases so you can do something positive about them, so you can work toward equity. I've got a lot of yeses here, and a number of people who admitted they haven't read the book yet. I highly recommend it. I think it is a very good place to start. And I think it's a really good place to start because this is really difficult stuff. And as she talks about in the book, we have a tendency to shy away from it because we don't want to feel bad about ourselves, right? We don't want to feel like we're racist but we need to embrace this idea in order to move through it and make change. So we have to stop thinking of it as good and bad, and that if we have these biases, that means we're bad. That's why I keep emphasizing the fact that we all have implicit bias. Every single one of us has implicit bias. It's about the way our brains are wired. There's nothing wrong with that, right? It's about the decisions that are made. It's about what you do, the next step. And that's where we do have power, we have control, but we need to do something in order to make sure that the next steps we take in every situation are equitable ones. And we can only do that by really being more comfortable with the fact that we can have these biases. We can even have racist attitudes, and that doesn't make us a bad person. It makes us a person that is seeking change, learning, finding out more. That's why you're all here, so that you can do better, right? And so that's really important. So it's an excellent place to start. And somebody said, I haven't read it because I've heard there are better books about anti-racism to read. And there might be other books, better books about anti-racism to read. I think what's most important is that you read something, right? That you, if there are other better books, this is the one that I know that I recommend, but what's important is that you don't use that as an excuse to not read any book, right? I have one of my classes that I teach at NYU, one of the students said, well, I haven't read that book because she shouldn't be making all this money. It should be some Black person. Okay, that might well be true, but the information is still important, right? So now this student hadn't read the book and she's, railing against it, and we can't, it's like complaining about the president if you haven't voted, right? You can't complain about something if you haven't taken in the content. And so I say again, it may not be the best book, it's certainly not the only book, but if you read some book, then you're likely to start working on this stuff. If you avoid the book because you've heard that they're better, then you're not reading anything, or it sounds like you're not reading anything, and therefore you're not putting in the work. Those who don't understand implicit bias tend to have a zero-sum view of the world. They refuse to believe that they are racist or biased, since they see that as bad, rather than something that can be worked on and changed. Excellently said. Yes, and that's why we're doing this workshop, and that's why I keep saying implicit bias, we all have them. It's the way our brains are wired. So we now have to do something about it. Okay, although we're not at questions yet, how to be an anti-racist by Abram X. Okay, so that's another Abram X Kennedy. Kendi is a great choice for someone who would prefer an author of color. All right, excellent. Okay, so let's move on. New research suggests that that mindfulness can also reduce implicit bias by short-circuiting negative associations, by slowing down the process so that we can notice our first thoughts, our biased thoughts and feelings, and disrupt that tendency to unthinkingly accept reflexively those triggered biases, right? So it's important that this is another method that we can use, and research shows that it can be effective. All right. And then self-care. And this breath square we're going to do right before we go into question and answers. I sometimes start this workshop with it, but I decided, given the virtual setting and people coming in late, that I wanted everybody to be here for the breath square. So we're going to do this right before we go into Q&A. But one of the areas I specialize in is self-care. My final suggestion to you is self-care. When we're tired or stressed, we're less effective at processing new information and rely more on our unconscious patterns. So it's really, really important that we focus on taking good care of ourselves as part of our undoing racism and focusing on equality. I'm going to put into the chat I'll put that in later. So right now, what I'm going to ask us to do, because I find this to be the most effective way to handle these things when I'm doing workshops, is we're going to take a 4-minute break, and I'm going to ask you for your feedback. Okay. Before we go into Q&A and before I do the breath square, I'm going to ask you for your feedback. So I'm going to put in the chat the link for the feedback form. And I'm going to ask you all, let me make sure I'm sending it to everyone. I'm going to ask you all to pull this up right now And it's only a 5-question form to take a minute to provide feedback. And I'll know you're back, because when you come back from doing the feedback form, I'd like you to put into the chat your biggest takeaway from today's workshop. Okay, so you guys got that? You're gonna take that link, go to the feedback form. I'm gonna give you all a couple of minutes, answer the few questions that are there. There are only 5 questions, I think, in the feedback form. And then when you come back, please type into the chat, what's your biggest takeaway from today? When I see lots of people answering that question in the chat, I'll know everybody's back from doing the feedback form, and we can move on. All right, well, I still see some people are filling out the feedback form, but some people have finished and are starting to put their biggest takeaway from today's workshop into the chat. So I'm going to share some of those. Somebody said, I need to read White Fragility. I am interested in the 21-day challenge. Good. That we can work on our implicit biases. Yes, that's a really good takeaway. And I hope that that helps with not having that good, bad thinking, to understand that we all have these biases and that we can work on them. What I can do next, to talk about this with my colleagues more. Excellent. That implicit bias is in the subconscious and we don't even realize we're doing it, and what we can do next. Excellent. To read more. I feel I'm pretty mindful of my biases. Okay. That it's not easy to counteract our unconscious assumptions. It takes work. It does take work. And I think one of the important things that I hope you take away is that sometimes we also need to put systems in place. So yes, it's not easy to, because we don't even know that they're there. But if you put systems in place, like in that video where they showed you either making things blind so people don't know and people don't have the names, so that they're making a choice based on just the qualifying information, or deciding ahead of time before you're hiring somebody, what are the qualities we're looking for to minimize the effects of other things like our unconscious bias. So let's get back to the chat. Read more. I'm really glad to see the resources and tools available to help me be actively aware and conscious of my own biases. Even if we can't change our thoughts, we can be more conscious of our actions and change them. Excellent. That's a fabulous takeaway. That's exactly what I want you to take away, is that we can choose what we're going to do and make sure that even if we have, and it's okay to have that first thought that might be biased, but it's about what you do with it. I feel comfortable thinking about my own biases and learning to work through them, to be more mindful. I'm going to buy white supremacy workbook, and I'm interested in 21-day challenge. I understand our implicit biases, both the ones we have and the ones we experience. We need to deliberately learn more and challenge our thinking and that of others. A muscle of strength. That's right, we have to build that muscle. I want to take the quiz. Great, I'm glad somebody wants to take the quiz. I think that what needs to be included is the automatic response that we have been taught is beautiful, ugly, friendly, unfriendly faces. Okay. Let's see. I'll definitely look at the resources. It made me uncomfortable, but this too is important to ignore. Yes. And as I said in the beginning, I expected you to be a little uncomfortable, but sometimes that's what we need in order to grow. Okay, I can work harder on my reactions. Excellent. All right, I think we've given enough time to the quiz. I want to make sure we have time for questions and answers. So I'm going to stop sharing now. I'm going to put the two into the chat. I'm going to put the link for the handout and for the 5-day challenge, the 5-day journey to inner peace, which I'll tell you more about in a minute, into the chat to make sure everybody gets that before I take myself off. And again, as you're thinking about the things you can do, I want to challenge you to think about 3 areas of your life. What can you do personally, right, to fight against inequity? What are the things you can do personally? Personally, you can do things like find out more about your personal implicit biases. You can work on increasing your social circle to include people from different cultures and experiences so that you can gain more authentic information about them and not just get your information from TV and books. What can you do professionally, right? Can you make sure that you are also increasing your professional circles to include people of other cultures and experiences in your professional circle? And can you make sure that when there are hiring practices or other practices that you are being mindful of inequity and trying to put things in place? And then what can you do in your community? You know, voting is always a great thing to do, but there's other things that you might do in your community so that you can really work on being more equitable and undoing implicit biases. Oh, I see something long here. I'm sorry, I'm reading a long message in the chat. So I think it's important to mention for people to remember that when they look to expand their networks and social circles, they also remember to stay mindful and alert of the emotional labor they may inadvertently be asking people of color to participate in. Yes, I think that's very important, which is why I suggest you do things like read White Fragility, because that book really does a good job of explaining that and helping people figure out ways to interact without adding that load. So yes, you want to have authentic friendships, because the more you have those experiences with other people, the more you can bring, it helps loosen your implicit biases. It changes your implicit biases so that you don't have only the programming from what you've seen on TV or what you've seen on the news, but that doesn't mean that you want to add the pressure to these people to educate you. Right? That's not their job to educate you. They're going to be your friend. If they're going to be your colleague, then that's their job, to be your friend or colleague. You cannot rely on them for education. You need to do your education in other ways, like reading White Fragility. However, they may add to your education. It really depends on the nature of the relationship. But just being in that relationship, listening to them talk about their experiences will be an educative factor for you. But no, you don't want to put the pressure on people to educate them. All right, I'm going to take us off of share here, stop sharing. And I'm going to, one of the things the last things we talked about was mindfulness. One of the things that is my area of specialty is mindfulness. So at every workshop, I like to give this gift of 1 minute stress reduction to everyone. And that will help us all, because, yes, this was a little difficult for some of us, will help us all get grounded before we go off to our day. So I'm going to lead us all through this 1 minute stress reduction, which I call the breath square. I'm going to lead you through that and then open everything up to questions. If at that point you want to take yourself off of mute so that you could ask me your question directly, or if you want to chat the question and put the question in the chat, we can do that. So we'll do that for the rest of the time. But before we do that, just in case anybody needs to go, I want to make sure you all get this gift. So I'm going to ask you right now to make sure that you put me on speaker's view. Right, so that I am the main person that you see, so that you can see me clearly as I lead you through this gift. Okay. I'm going to lead you through taking one breath in to a slow count of 4, holding that breath in for a slow count of 4, exhaling for a slow count of 4, and then waiting before you breathe in again for a slow count of 4. We're going to do that 4 times. Again, I call it the breath square. It's my 1 minute stress reducer. It's the kind of thing that you can do so that you can bring your thinking mind online before you make decisions, right? But it's the kind of thing that we all need right now in this COVID time to help us reduce stress. All right, is everybody ready? Here we go. You can, by the way, you can follow my finger as I draw a square through the air. You can draw a square around whatever screen you're looking at, or you can close your eyes and just listen to the sound of my voice. Whatever works for you is perfectly fine. Here we go. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Okay. Return to breathing as normal. And before we get into questions and answers about implicit bias, would anybody like to unmute and share their experience of the breath square? What was that like? Or put in the chat. Okay, somebody put in the chat, nice. Okay, somebody said they hope when COVID is over, we can have this workshop in person. I'd love to do that. Okay, very relaxed, relaxing and calming. Wonderful, great. I'm glad you all found their breathing relaxing and calming. And somebody said they had trouble holding their breath. You know what? It's the kind of thing that you get better with the more you practice, and that's okay. But I hope you still got some benefit from it. I like the square imagery. Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'm glad that you like that. That's my gift to you. And I hope I got you a little, or I may have gotten you a little riled up talking about all these difficult things. So I like to make sure that you go up back to your day, relaxed and ready to work. Are there any questions? There might have been some in the chat earlier. Please ask me again, because now I'm focusing on your questions. Or if you'd like to raise your hand and we can take you off mute and you can ask your question directly, whichever you prefer. Okay. And again, there may have been a couple of questions that if you asked a question earlier and I didn't answer it already, please put it back in, because I might have missed it trying to balance both presenting and checking out the chat. Okay. Someone asked me to put my email address in the chat, so I will do that. Oh, and we've got a hand up. Yes, I will put my email address in the chat, but let's see, we've got somebody that'd like to speak. Go ahead.
There. So one issue I've been seeing a lot lately, I connect with a lot of people who are involved in disability activism via social media, and something that's come up, especially in relation to violence from police and other authority figures, is the bias towards people of color who are displaying symptoms of disability or mental illness, especially disabilities that might affect the ability to speak or respond or perceive when they are being addressed. And I know, even being on the autism spectrum myself, I've found that there are times that my biases are more in favor of non-disabled people, of non-autistic people's behaviors and perceptions. There have been times that I've caught myself thinking negative things about another person and then realized, well, wait, I exhibited those same behaviors when I'm low in spoons, when I'm having trouble masking as not autistic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I think it's important to consider that kind of, especially in terms of intersectionality. And I was wondering if you have any recommendations that especially focus on biases in regards to behavior, not just appearance.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to think about that. Off the top of my head, no. But I'd say that some of the same issue applies You know, it's really about being more mindful of stopping and not going with your first thought, right? So just like you said, that you realize that sometimes you have those biases, we all do. You know, I realize I have those too, even about people of color. But it's about really putting things in place so that we don't act on those things. So for example, in terms of police action, really helping the police understand that sometimes people are not responding to you, and it's not because they are challenging your authority. It's because they may have a problem with their speech, right? So that we teach people that even if that's their first assumption, double check that before you assume that it's a challenge to your authority. Make sure this person can actually hear you, right? And because if they're hearing impaired and they're not looking at your mouth, they may not realize you're speaking to them. So therefore they may not stop, they may not comply. So putting those things in place are the things that help with every bias. You know, when we put those systems in place so that people do not just act on their implicit bias, but have something else to do. But that requires actually putting systems in place, and that requires people from these different experiences to be active in the systems to help people think about it, because it's hard for us to think about things outside of our experience. You know, as a hearing person, and as a person that doesn't have any issues with my hearing, it's hard for me to be mindful of some of the things that might come up for somebody that is hearing impaired. So we need people who have all these experiences to chime in to help us, or we need to be mindful of doing our research so that we can make sure that these things are taken care of. All right, there are questions, so let me take a second. I promise before we end, let me just say the easiest way to get to me is my website, which is drakhu.com, DRAKHU.com. But I will try to type that and my email address into the chat. How to get others aware of their stubborn implicit bias. Have them take this workshop, I suppose. Maybe get them to go on the implicit bias project so that they can see that they have some biases. Please let everyone know. All right, I'm sorry, I'm trying to go through this and answer at the same time. Can you include in your presentation bias-based foreign people? All right, again, someone asked about biases facing foreign people, and I think, again, some of the same rules apply. That it's all about, we all have these biases, but it's about what we do with them that I'm encouraging people to be aware of. Okay, that's a comment, so I'll read that in a minute. Crisis interventions training for the first responders can help to understand the situation. Yes, somebody said crisis intervention training for first responders can help understand the situation. That's the training that I do with the hostage negotiators and emergency response teams. Is I do crisis intervention and I teach them about mental health and mental illness to try to give them the tools. The problem is that I don't think that our the first responders, the police officers, all have equal training, so that they don't all have the information that the hostage negotiators have. They don't come on the scene until later on. And sometimes some of these issues come up early on. So I'm fighting to try to get more training and make sure that all police officers have more of this training. Okay, someone said, I've been blessed with friends who have corrected me throughout the years. And that is a blessing, because it can feel like a burden. And so we do want to be able to be in relationships where we can correct each other and share both ways. So that is a blessing. Are there any other questions, and would anybody else like to share? If you would, raise your hand and we'll take you off mute. Understanding that it is work is half the battle. Yes. Understanding that this is work is half the battle. Yes. Being aware of it is half the battle. That is the first step, because once you're aware of it and you know there's work to be done, hopefully you'll take up the mantle and you'll start doing the work. All right. Are there any, oh, I see a new message. I am blessed to have colleagues in the library world who help me to be more understanding and more empathetic toward others. Fabulous. Yes, I'm getting a lot of blessings, but are there any other questions? But I'm so glad to hear that. Okay, and someone said, hundreds of years of institutional racism, it's going to take time and a lot of work. Let's get started. That's a wonderful place to start. And yes, it is going to take time and it is going to take a lot of work. But if we all do our part, if we all think of what we can do personally, professionally, and for our community, then we can all have a role in moving toward more equity. And that is a great place to start. All right, if there are no final questions, I'm gonna turn it back over to Krishna, to the library, and see if there's anything else you'd like to say before we end our workshop for today.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Akhu. So everyone, we will be sending out some follow-up information and contact information, the link to Dr. Akhu's website. I also just want to mention to people that we have a workshop coming up on August 6th about dealing with the stress of returning to the workplace. I encourage you to register for that as well if you have the time at westchesterlibraryassociation.org. But thank you everyone for taking the time out of your day to participate in this, to participate in the chat, to speak up. I think it's a signal of good work to come.
Thank you all for your time, energy, and participation. You guys were wonderful. Thank you.